handouts, I think. There'll be a quiz at the end. No, I'm just kidding. No quiz. So I'm going to, let me just see if I can. I have some things here on this. I'm just going to make sure that I can get to it. Hopefully, some things to read here. Yes, I always say prayers for these things. You know how it goes.
Yes.
Okay. So, the lecture that I have for you today is basically my thoughts on psychic phenomena and spiritualism. How many of you come from a Christian Bible background? Okay, not everybody, but a number of people. So for me, that's where I started too. I started in a UCC church, which was growing up and doing music. There are great music traditions in the churches, so I've been in different churches more for the music tradition as I worked professionally. And there's some great music stuff going on. But there was a point. The church I grew up was a UCC church, which is very sort of German Reformed but very liberal church. But there was still a lot of things. It didn't touch that particular church didn't touch upon a lot of things that are biblical. It was not a hellfire and brimstone kind of church. But there were still always questions and things, and there was a point at which where I sort of had to leave the church, not to deny all that stuff, but to sort of branch out and learn more things. So one of the things that always bothered me a little bit about biblical stuff was that the information, a lot of times because there are a number of books put together to create the Bible as sort of the canon for the Christian church, there are things that are really sort of contradictory there. And I witnessed a lot of people who will say, no, it's not things aren't contradictory, but they'll really tie themselves in knots to try to make A be equal to Z. And I've always wondered, why that, for me it was, I had to look at it as a logical thing. I couldn't check my logical brain at the door and say, I'm going to just pretend these opposite things aren't there. And yet they were. Just for a real good example is Jesus sayings, you can seek and you will find, knock, the door will be open, ask, it will be given to you, which was like 3 different ways of saying if you have questions, you'll get answers. And on the other side of that, which were also words when I talked with ministers about it, where the other side was, God is a mystery, you can't know the answer to the questions. So, and I looked at those 2 separate ideas, opposite ideas, and said, well, which one is it? It can't be both of those things. It's either one or the other. So, so a lot of it is, there's good stuff there, but we're sort of, there's dichotomous stuff there, and you either have to sort of choose one or the other and leave the other thing go. There's a lot of pressure to sort of try to believe everything, or saying you can't pick and choose, although I don't know how you rectify those things. So spiritualism and psychic phenomenon things are also in the Bible, and they get, in some cases, it's good stuff. In other cases, they get a really bad rap. So I thought I would look at just a little bit of that with you as sort of an introduction to this flyer that I've given you, which I think was, I got it at I can't remember what Spiritualist church, but some years ago. There are also additional flyers in the, out in the foyer if you'd like another copy or want to share a copy with somebody. But I thought they were, really gave a good thorough list of many of the passages that would show these things. Now what's interesting is, I'm just going to read a couple of these things, because of course the Bible has forbidden these things. So, but it's sort of interesting because it sort of depends what you call it. Because so if it's sorcery or witchery, Or if it's fortune telling, that's bad. If it's prophecy, that's good. I don't know what the difference between those two things are. To me, they're the same thing, but it was also the word necromancy that's in there also. And so there's a lot of admonishment, a lot of like, don't, stay away from that. And of course, there's a lot of, you know, it's going to be terrible the outcome if you deal with those things. And then in another place, it's, hey, these are gifts of the Spirit. So it's interesting because you have to get your dichotomous mind to say which one of those is it actually, or you know, how can it be both things? So here's an example, just a few examples. In Isaiah it says, and when they said to you, inquire of the mediums and the necromancers who chirp and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Should they inquire of the dead on behalf of the living? Is the question. I think the answer is supposed to be no, but I'd be like, yeah, okay. You know? Leviticus, do not turn to mediums or necromancers. Do not seek them out, and so make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. Deuteronomy, when you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. They shall not be found among you, among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices, oh, glasses would be good. Okay, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens, or a sorcerer or charmer or a medium or necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations the Lord your God is driving them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. Leviticus, a man or woman who is a medium or necromancer shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones, their blood shall be upon them. Revelation, but as the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers. So, you know, we put all the bad stuff together, but we're going to throw that thing in there too. So, idolaters and all the liars. You see how the sorcerer, the mediums got thrown into that group. Their portion will be the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. So, there are just a few examples scattered through of saying can't do this. Of course, then there are some situations where people would be rewarded by doing readings. So in Daniel, the king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. Got astrology in there too. The king declared to wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. So some great rewards there, if you do the right kind of seeing. Then, of course, there's Corinthians, which talks about the gifts of the Spirit. To each is given in the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. For to one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom, and to another the utterance of knowledge according to the Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by the one Spirit, to another the working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another the ability to distinguish between spirits, to another various kinds of tongues, to another interpretation of tongues. All of these are empowered by one and the same Spirit, who apportions to each individual as he wills. So there's an example talking about gifts of the Spirit. And of course, naturally we look at things as the Spirit brings you, these are gifts that are sort of natural things as you explore your spirituality. We look at it as development and understanding those things. So there's an example of it. And it sort of depends what name you call it again. Of course, there are some also that talk about, in 1 John, it talks about, beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. So in that case, they're saying, yeah, check out the spirits, but then you also have to discern which are good ones, which are bad ones. So we have all of these messages. They're all mixed messages. If you look at them, they're all stuffed in the Bible. So we have to sort of look at that and say, what do we know and what do we understand? Or my question is this: why are there examples where they want to make sure you don't do these things? In fact, there are even passages in the Bible that say, the passages actually say, when you're dead, there's nothing. You're forgotten. There's no way you can communicate with the dead. That there are actually some passages that way. So you look at this, and we feel it, we understand it, we know it. It's sort of a natural outspringing of what we learn, and it's sort of naturally there. Those people are interested in healing. I know our friend Eileen Davies, who we met and studied with at Stansted. She talked about her interest knowing that life goes on. She knew this from a young age. And she talked about being really interested in healing, and then seeing that there was an unfolding of her psychic abilities and her abilities of mediumship just became sort of a byproduct of that whole thing. So these are all natural to us as we understand them. So ask yourself, well, why would there be such a statement against these things in certain parts of the Bible? Now the guys, the Council of Nicaea, the Council of Trent, the guys who put together and were trying to create a canon for religion, they didn't do a very good job, because what they did was they said these certain things, but then other places they left the other stuff in. So they didn't clear out the Bible of everything to make it be black and white, basically. So we have the choice of sort of discerning with our own mind, and it's interesting because there's an actual biblical statement that says reason the scriptures, which what I understand that means is use your own brain and think through the scriptures, because you do have to decide which one of these do I put aside, which one do I actually accept as truth for me. And that's been the process. So for us, it seems to be a very natural outspringing of these gifts, and we nurture these gifts. And of course, we have found that kind of communication with those that we understand the continuity of life, and that goes on. It is quite understandable why some of the biblical writers would be so against that. Why is that? Because they were trying to set up this uniqueness of Jesus as a person who none of us could be like. Of course, that flies in the face of actually what Jesus said, which was, you'll do all the things I do and more. So we have many examples of Jesus healing, giving prophecy, all of these things, and he's telling people, you'll do these things. In the Acts of the Apostles, we actually see his apostles doing the things that he said. So that means they were so-called not born like him. They're just regular people, but the gifts were bestowed upon them, and they did those things too. So all of these things are just natural outspringing, and we see it there. It's given to us, and yet you can understand that the writers, in trying to create this special case of Jesus as a Son of God, in an almost idolatrous way, believing in Jesus, and then he's different than everyone else. You can't be like him. We shouldn't try to be. That idea is one of basically, it's fear-based, basically, and one of control. So how do I control you? I tell you, you can't possibly get information from the beyond. There's no way you can do it. Here's what I tell you have. Here's your information. And therefore, you can't get any other information beyond that information. So that's not, of course, we don't feel that way. We're willing to hear information. And much of the information is very helpful to us. So we understand it that way. But we can also understand how if trying to establish a religion in a certain way means controlling people, that is often fear-based. And when we see things that are fear-based, you should be afraid of hell, you should be afraid of these things, that's so that you, out of fear, feel like I can't go there, I can't look at these other things. The fact that you're sitting in these seats means that you have decided not to live fear-based, but understand things from an attitude of love and understand the continuity of life in that way. So we've understood that, and we've not closed the door to that kind of communication. So these are, the reason why I mention these things is because if you grew up in that kind of a thing, there might be still a little concern or a little itching saying, I'm not 100% sure I'm okay with all of this. And for you, I think the thing is, for me in my discoveries of this, it is to say, yes, these things are real, that we know, we understand them. Do people use things, are there some spiritual aspects that can be negative? Possibly. But we work very hard to avoid the kind of negative spirits and other things like this. We don't look at it that way. We look at the highest and best always, and we see the edification of this because we see how much it helps people to understand the continuity of life beyond this. So I guess in all of this, for me, the thing is just understanding. I do understand why these certain phrases exist. I find it easy to dismiss them because I focus on the phrases that say these are gifts that come from this. As you grow your spirituality, these things can be there, and we can glean from them and learn a lot from them as we go. So in that, I wanted to just look at a couple of examples that are from this flyer that are just examples. It's interesting because you can read into this by understanding it from the concept of it. So for example, like apports, we understand what apports are, but we don't think about reading a Bible scripture and seeing that thing. So one thing that this flyer helps with is to sort of go back to the Bible and look at those things and say, hey, if you look at this is an example of this thing. So these things really exist there. So let me just look, I just want to look at, you can go through this on your own and look at it if you like. But I wanted to just look at a couple examples. So in the, first of all, looking at number one, there's ports. And so I look at the one example that was in Numbers 11:31, and it says here, I'm using a King James Version, so that's the translation that's there. Bible translations is another topic for another day. But anyway, we'll look at what's here. And there went forth a wind from the Lord, and it brought quails from the sea, and let them fall beside the camp, about a day's journey on the side and a day's journey on the other side, round about the camp and about 2 cubits above the face of the earth. So there's an example of apports coming from the sea, quails that were dropped. Also, when manna was delivered, another story of manna being delivered, that's really just materialization out of nowhere, basically. So, and that was food to provide for people. So there's an example of that. An example of automatic writing. That is, we'll look at the Daniel one, which is 5:5, and this is automatic writing. Let me see. Immediately the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand, and the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. So he saw, basically it's a story of him seeing automatic writing on the wall. So that's a relationship of automatic writing. Another example is, I'll skip some of these, I just want to look at a few of them. You can certainly take time a little bit later to look at some others. Number 4 is clairaudience, hearing. So we'll look at that, and in this I'm looking at the example in Acts, and that's verse 7:31. When Moses saw it, he wondered at the sight. And as he drew near and to look, the voice of the Lord came. I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham and Isaac and of Jacob. And Moses trembled and did not dare look. So there's an example of him hearing a voice, clairaudience, hearing the voice of God. Another example is, clairvoyance, which would be seeing. I have an example there. And that is in Kings, 2 Kings 6, verse 6, 12, 17. And one of his servants said, "None, my lord, O king." None, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet who was in Israel, telling the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedchamber. And he said, "Go and see where he is, that I may send and seize him." It was told him, "Behold, he is Dothan." So he sent their horses and chariots and a great army, and they came by night and surrounded the city. So it's again, in this case, there's a sort of a vision that's coming, it's a clairvoyance. As far as healing goes, there are a number of examples. Of course, Jesus did many readings and healings, and then of course in the Acts the apostles did these healings also. Many examples of them, and that healing is not something that we're not supposed to be able to do. It was obviously set up by Jesus to have people keep doing that. It wasn't that he was special and could and no one else can't. So healing would continue beyond what the disciples did too. So there are examples of the gift of healing. In Corinthians 12, 12:9. Actually, in Corinthians 12, it's really actually a good passage because it talks about spiritual gifts in this passage, that whole passage that I mentioned some of it earlier. Now there are a variety of gifts, but the same Spirit, and there are varieties of service, but the same Lord, and there are varieties of working, but in the same God who inspires them all in every one. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. To one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom, and to another the utterance of knowledge according to the same Spirit. To another faith by the same Spirit. To another gifts of healing by the one Spirit. To another the working of miracles. To another prophecy. So again, just a list, all things that seem very natural to us as we study, but a list of those particular gifts. So that's another example. Let me see, there's a couple other things. Levitation, when Jesus is walking on the water, that's an example of levitation. And of course, materialization is a very interesting one too. Materialization, as I mentioned. Here in this one, we'll look at the Daniel example under number 16, materialization. In Daniel, let me see, it's 3:25. In this, the context of this was, this is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who were thrown into a fire, but the fire didn't consume them. They fell bound in the burning, they were fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He said to his counselors, "Did we not cast the 3 men bound in the fire?" The answer said to the king, "True, O king." He answered, "But I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." So again, a materialization of a 4th person within that fire that's not consuming these people that were put into there. Let's see if there's a few others. In the there's an example of psychometry in some ways it might be a little bit of a stretch, but it does make sense in the psychometry, which is of course touching an object. In this case, it was when the woman at the well brought to Jesus water, and he was holding the water pot, and then he did some prophecy from that water pot to the woman. And there's not a lot of talk about the idea that he's holding the water pot, but you can glean from that there's some psychometry there. So if you think of psychometry as a methodology, he was actually gleaning something and giving prophecy from holding something. That's an example of that. A couple other thing is the idea of mediumship, which, these are sort of psychic phenomena, but mediumship is also a part of what's there. And there are a couple of really clear examples of speaking to others, of others showing up, that have been human beings that have passed on and that have come back. There are examples of that. One example of that is the story of Saul and what they call the witch of Endor, but basically a medium. Of course, when they're trying to put down the idea of mediumship, they may use the term witch. But it's not necessarily, that's just a derogatory term. So in with that, in this 28:3, it says, "Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned him and buried him in Ramah in his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and the wizards out of the land. The Philistines assembled and came and encamped Shunem, and Saul gathered all the Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. Then Saul saw the army of the Philistines. He was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, 'Seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her.' And his servant said to him, 'Behold, there is a medium at Endor.' So Saul disguised himself and put on other garments and went, he and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, 'Divine